So thank you for having me. They told me this is unsturdy and I'm very clumsy. But I hope that whatever I have to offer really engages all of us and also engages me also. So I'm also hearing myself. Decolonization. Is it a good word? Is it a bad word? Is it a neutral word? Let's see. What a time to be a Christian. We have a world that's absolutely going bonkers. It's mind-boggling. And I find that we need to think carefully about the kinds of Christianities we have, the kinds of Christianities we inhabit. And this is a lingering question when all is said and done. And deep within this question is something even more primary. How do we think theologically about these things? What informs the way we think? Not only what is Christianity and what kind of Christianity, but more deeply at a meta level, not Facebook. Facebook is called meta now. No, not that one. At a meta level, underneath everything, what kinds of thinking informs how we live, how we act, how we think. Today, I want us to consider a decolonial perspective. We live in a complex theological and sociological time. Forgive the big words. I might slip into some big words, but just bear with me. Where conversations around decolonization are growing. On the one hand, there is a deep suspicion of the term wokeism, seeing decolonial attention to the past as unnecessary and divisive. On the other hand, there is a sense in which the legacies of colonization are so pervasive and deep that only a decolonial perspective can address it. This lecture argues for the latter. I'm one of the people on that other side. And I want to outline what that decolonial perspective might look like, beyond all attempts at politicizing it. Let me say something about who I am, because I can't speak to you without you knowing who is speaking, because we don't speak from a neutral space. I have an agenda, just like everyone in here. I'm an Anglican priest, formed in the African Caribbean, whose ministry has been on both sides of the Atlantic, the Caribbean and in the UK. I'm Bahamian. I'm from the most beautiful place on earth. If you want to fight me for it, let's go outside. But I am from a region, the Caribbean, that has been perhaps the biggest experiment or the most brutal experiment in colonial domination. It is still deeply affected by colonial forces that continue to evolve, becoming more and more deadly for my people. I'm a Caribbean contextual and practical theologian. My academic work comes from a deep commitment to church praxis, to justice, to wholeness. That's a key thing for me. And the need to look inward at ourselves as we ask, what kind of church are we in this world? And I have a particular commitment to interdisciplinary thinking, because I believe that theology doesn't do it alone. We need each other and all our insights. And at the Queen's Foundation, I get to exercise from that point my theological imagination. I'm also deeply embedded in the Church of England and the Anglican Communion. Oh gosh, they made me a canon. And what that means, if you know anything about Liverpool, the slave trade, the Caribbean, the African continent, you can't separate all these things. But what this means is that I do not get to run away as if I'm not part of this. I'm deeply embedded. So it matters. The church matters. And the soul of the church matters. And with all that said, let me paint a picture for you. Last year, 2025, we had Nicaea 2025. You remember this? October. It's the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed. The World Council of Churches put on its Faith and Order Sixth Ecumenical World Council in Egypt. I happen to be a keynote speaker. I'm a Caribbean Faith and Order Commissioner. So I represent my region. I did not know that my talk from a decolonial perspective and mission was the talk on decolonization in that space. In an ecumenical space, half of the room rejects this term and half embraces this term. The half usually that is suspicious is usually the Orthodox, the Roman Catholic, more conservative groups, usually white, Northern European. And then there are many across the world who are in that space who are saying, hey, but if you see it from my perspective, this makes a lot of sense. So immediately I was caught in between two polarizing positions. When I was done and the way I framed it, one of the Orthodox bishops came up to me and he said, you know, you helped me to change my mind on this. Just the way you put it. He said, but I have a question. He said, can we talk about colonization for churches in the Middle East who are very oppressed and for whom European colonization never happened? For us, modernity, in his mind, for us, modernity never happened. You cannot paint us with the same brush. I think he has a point. And if I'm intellectually honest, you cannot have unnuanced positions and outlooks in complex matters. So you have to read deeply into a context. This is a context I don't know, so I need to learn. And I have to accept that. So I came away thinking to myself, your insights need to be deeper, brother. So it was a learning for me as well. So I could come with an ideological perspective, but I also need to listen. Now, I have big questions for him, but the truth is, it's a divisive term at the highest level of Christian thinking and imagination. Secondly, race relations in this country. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. We witnessed something moving in ways we never saw it before across continents, involving all sorts of people, a reaction to brutal slaying of Black lives. We've been seeing it all the time. If you don't want to see it, you won't see it. But for one moment, we started to see. And when that movement started to peak, we had an equally ferocious, powerful movement. All lives matter. Again, polarization happens. But the All Lives Matter didn't realize that Black Lives Matter is advocating for all lives. It just happens that Black life was never considered as life. Only if we could see deeply into why people are moving, then we might learn something. So we're seeing these things out in the world. Then you have, oh Jesus, the rise of the far right. We now live in a time where there is clearly a rise in this kind of reasoning, where Christian marches in Muslim territories begin to look militaristic. We're seeing what happens when conservative fundamentalist radicalization of many young people take place, especially young men. And the rhetoric used comes straight out of historic missionary Christianity. What's up with that? The Christianity that only manifests in one way, with one language and one culture, a kind of exceptionalism that always leads to violence. You take that to its logical conclusion, and what you have is violence of some kind, in some way, to someone. Is that what we're about? It's dangerous. And then you have the contested legacies of enslavement. 2023 was quite a year. You remember 2023? You were chilling out, right? COVID was over and you was chilling. If you say, oh Lord, I survived. In 2023, I found myself going around the country at different cathedrals talking about the legacies of enslavement, or being part of conversations. From Bristol to Wales to Chester to Liverpool, even Birmingham. The list goes on. Churches and universities, and it's spreading by the day, are having to face its historic past. And when you start looking into that glass, you see it everywhere. It is everywhere. How can it not be? And my questions for us today is, how do we begin to think through these issues? How do we begin to cut through all the ideological warfare to see the picture clearer? And I believe the key is having a decolonial stance. You still with me? Let's keep going. So coloniality, what is it? Colonization can be considered, as Marcella Alphus-Reed says, a method of physical and symbolic control characterized by the act of settling a community into a region or country of a different cultural, religious, and political ethos. Colonization is a game of power and domination. Post-colonialism as a discourse in the university, as an academic critical discipline, exposes colonization and colonialism for what they are. Let me remind you of the story of the emperor's new clothes. You remember? The emperor could enforce the narrative to all within his reign that his new clothes are so magnificent. He naked, you know. He naked. And he even ain't good looking. But the cognitive dissonance, the brain confusion that makes others believe that the emperor's nakedness is a fashion statement is precisely because the one telling the story has power and enforces that interpretation on everyone else, on people who have no power. In post-colonial studies, the nakedness of empire and of colonization is that it is brutal, it's bloody, as well as psychologically, ethnically, spiritually, socially, and culturally destructive to those ruled by empire. A good example of this is the Pax Romana. For those who did theology or study theology, when you read the New Testament context, you are reading a context of colonial power, without exception. We find that in the New Testament and in the early church deeply. And the narrative of first century Palestine was that Rome brought peace to its territories. Peace? But this peace was paved by blood. This peace was about submission. This peace was about creating colonies. Oh, and what a wonderful word, subjects. It's interesting that there's this phrase across the New Testament, the peace of Christ, Pax Christi, and the peace of Christ is radically different to that of Rome. Again, my simple question, what kinds of Christians are we? Christ brings peace through sacrifice, through surrender, through love, through humility. He gets mad too because of a love for justice. It's important to state plainly the insights that this kind of thinking can bring, you have to look at power. Looking carefully at who has power and how it's exercised is key in any kind of thinking about coloniality. You also have to think about what colonization does. It's psychological conditioning. My book on self-negation is the fact that the colonizer isn't out there. The colonizer is in here and in here. Now, how do I deal with this? I could blame everybody out there, but how do I disentangle this and this? That's a big job. People like W.E.B. Du Bois and Frantz Fanon have described the ways that colonization operates. It's a psychological reality that affects both the colonized and the colonizer. It's toxic. It leads to self-hatred and destruction. And then there is another element to this. It creates a kind of dualism. I've been talking about different poles in these conversations. When we know that life is not black and white, you know that. If you have a family of children, you know it's not black and white. You have to deal in subtle ways as human beings. But a classic feature of colonial thinking, it operates by separating one from the other. There's no in-between. There can only be one language, not two or three. There can only be one religion, not many. And everything has to be controlled by a strong faction. The world has to go according to the emperor's imagination. And if you happen to be on the other side, then the other element is othering. So if you're black, or Asian, or brown, whatever you are, but you're not the dominant, if you are not heterosexual, if you are not male, if you're not rich, then you're nobody. That's how empires work. And if you are non-being, you could kill me. Easy. Without consequence. Am I not more than how I look? Do I not have a mother, a father, a brother, a child? Am I not more than my sexuality? How do you define me in limited ways? What Christianity does that if it's not imperial? Colonialism, as far as I'm concerned, is fundamentally about violence. Let me say some things about violence. In the history of Christianity, as well as the history and geographical landscape of the biblical world, colonial processes have been at play. Violence has been germane to this process as it requires the active control and dominion of cultures by the incoming power, which by means of superior military and political force. This starting to sound familiar? What's happening right now? Exercise substantial power over others. The processes of colonization are complex, and thinkers such as Fanon, Albert Memmi, Sylvia Wynter, Aimé César have highlighted that there is something inherently complex and interdependent between violence and colonization. The violence is also anthropological. It's about how human beings are framed theologically. Non-Western and Global South people and their theologies, amongst many other academic disciplines, have noted the ways in which human beings have been framed along racial and ethnic categories. This violence puts us into categories that do not help our flourishing, regardless. The violence is epistemological. Bear with me, because this is a big word, and the learned folks know this one. But we have to think about how things are framed and how thought patterns are engineered to create a picture. The knowledge systems of the non-Western world are disparate and ignored. Walter Mignolo's exploration of Western modernity and its epistemological implications is important here. He calls for an epistemic disobedience. You actually have to plug away from the way you have been groomed to think so that you can see things otherwise. And that's very difficult. And a decolonial option requires what he calls a delinking. It's the air we live in. Now, how do you unplug from the air you live in? That's difficult. And a lot of writers have started to help us see that coloniality and its foundation in theology is about epistemology, knowledge production, how we think, how we make people think. Is this the only kind of world we can have? The violence is also cultural. Ways of life by cultures pre-existing Europe by millennia are often minimized and supplanted. Missionary Christianity and its many guises preceded by cultural suppression and its own ethnic and cultural exceptionalism. We like to think that we're the only thing going, and we should be. What the hell? This big world we live in? You think you the center of the universe? You think God speaks only to you? What kind of Christianities do we inhabit? Can we not learn from others? I wish I was God sometimes. I think if I was God, I would cuss some people out. You better thank God I ain't God. This violence is also ecological. Coloniality is not simply an anthropocentric endeavor. It has implications for non-human beings in our world. It affects land and air and sea. Thinkers such as Malcolm Ferdinand remind us that events such as the transatlantic slave trade did not simply affect human bodies. They significantly reshaped the land and the animals, the places where we get medicine from, the food we are supposed to eat. Like, these are fundamental stuff. What we eat is affected. You think this is just about you humans? Think God only loves you humans? The violence is also existential. And what I mean is bodily violence. Why the hell? So I'm trying to be a good Christian. I'm trying to be a good Christian. But why the hell is there so much violence erupting all over the world? You ever thought about why? It don't make sense. It makes no sense. Because coloniality breeds, B-R-E-E-D-S, violence. That's the outcome. That's the ultimate conclusion. The violence, you good Christians, is also theological. Ultimately, theology itself has been formulated, inherited, perpetuated, and exercised through coloniality. Theology and theological stances must continually interrogate its own self, its embeddedness within systems of power and violence originating from imperial, economic, nationalist, and political systems, to name a few. All of this is linked together. Theology justified enslavement. Theology justifies genocide. Theology justifies homophobia. Theology justifies racism. Can we have theologies that do the opposite? Theology justifies war, and war is breaking out everywhere. So let me get to decolonization. What am I talking about? Two things. 1492. I always use this two examples. I'm getting excited, so please, let me try and be brief, because I could talk about these two all day. Columbus, 1492. You remember? Yeah, you don't remember. You weren't there. Listen, in 1492, Columbus met people he had never met before. He is on his way to the Far East. And he encounters, unbeknownst to him, people who are not people of the Far East, but they look like people of the Far East because they're a little brown. And he calls it, the region, a name, West Indies. And many, many years later, hundreds of years later, people like me who are from the region are thinking, West from where? West Indies? Who, according to whom? So I don't use the term. You might, because of cricket. I'm Caribbean. I'm not in Columbus's imagination. But what does he do? Let me, this is my way of retelling this story as if I were there. He gets shipwrecked off an island in what is now called the Bahamas, where I'm from. He calls it San Salvador, Holy Savior. If you get shipwrecked on the high seas, of course you're going to call it Holy Savior. But this island had a name. It was called Guanahani. And the inhabitants that were there, he comes, he plants a flag for the King and Queen of Spain, and he plants a cross. Wonderful, eh? What a great thing to claim this land for the King and Queen of Spain. This is what he writes in his diary. It appears to me that the people are ingenious and would be good servants, and I am of the opinion that they would readily become Christians, as they appear to have no religion. They very quickly learn such words as are spoken to them. If it please our Lord, I intend at my return to carry home 6 of them to your highnesses, that they may learn our language, and I saw no beast on the island. Unpack that for me. Your backside just got saved from death on the high seas, and you beat people you never saw before, and your first thought, they got no God, they got no language, they kind, and they're kind of stupid, and I want to take a few of them back across the same ocean to be servants. How the hell that thought arises in a situation like that? There's something about the way he sees things that's deeply problematic. You agree? 1995. Oh boy, you remember 1995. It was a good year. I was coming out of high school. And Pocahontas, the Disney movie, had just been released. Michelle, what's her name? What's her name? Oh gosh, Williams. Who sang the song? Vanessa Williams, sorry. I don't know who Michelle Williams is, but Vanessa Williams, because I probably had a crush then at 16. Anyway, let me keep focus. But she sang that song, and it captured our imagination. And you remember I don't know if you remember the storyline. I probably remember this clearly because of Vanessa Williams. I don't know. But the words of the song really challenges our imagination. This young, native, can't say American, indigenous woman of the Americas teaches this young captain, English captain, John Smith, something he never knew that he needed desperately to learn. You think I'm an important savage, an ignorant savage, and you've been so many places, I guess it must be so, but still I cannot see if the savage one is me. How can there be so much that you don't know? You don't know. You think you own whatever land you land on, that the earth is just a dead thing you can claim, but I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. And you think the only people are people who look and think like you. But if you walk the footsteps of a stranger, you learn the things you never knew. You never knew. He learns and is challenged to check his assumptions. He is not God. He does not know all things. And the way he goes on only brings death to everyone. If you're from the non-Western world, or if, like me, you grew up on an island, a rural island, where community matters, you learn how the rain smells, actually smells, and what matters in this life, if it's not the preservation of life. Fundamentally, things don't matter. People do. Your environment does. The chance to live just a little bit longer in peace matters most. For all, without exception. Doesn't this make sense to you? Third world theologians have asserted theological reflection should arise from local contexts. And we need to have hermeneutics of suspicion. Paul Ricoeur talks about this, that we need to have a way of thinking about how we think, being suspicious of what informs the way we think, because we have been shaped in ways that we can't yet take a hold of, but it's dangerous. And a Western theological discourse silences suppressed voices, both within the theological text, scripture or tradition, and both in real life. And in my region, the Caribbean, others have rejected the way theology has been handed down. It's been colonial and dangerous and divisive. And it's not in the interests of people who look like me. Michael Jagasaw, an exceptional thinker, says, having inherited Christianity with all its Western, Eurocentric baggage, I suggest we have become locked into a largely Protestant theological mindset that has relegated the act of imagination to the realm of hocus pocus, which is viewed with suspicion. Walter Mignolo, I think this is a name that you probably should look up, again, talks about this epistemic disobedience, this delinking. That's the task. Then you have other thinkers. Randall Woodley, indigenous theologian, problematizes the exercise of theology and the formation of doctrine from an indigenous point of view. Doctrine framed within a Western imagination excludes the deep insights of other traditions and cosmologies. And if you do not have all of these means with which to interrogate the mystery of Christianity, your hold and grasp of it will be limited. You want to read the Bible? Read it like a black woman. Then it really comes alive. And no joke. Then it really comes alive. You will see in that text what life really about. You want to read the Bible? really like an oppressed person, an exiled person, a person on the edge of death. Then Jesus starts to look real. Marika Rose, my friend, I wrote a book, Theology for the End of the World. It looks like the end of the world happening around, so this book's quite prophetic. A summary of a book, it feels like the world is ending. In the midst of apocalyptic times, it's tempting to cling on tightly to what we have. But what if our desire to save the world is part of the problem? Theology for the End of the World suggests that in responding to the deeply entwined systems of capitalism, racism, and patriarchy, we should stop trying to unearth a good version of Christianity which stands opposed to these forms of violence, and seek instead to reckon with the role that Christianity has played in making the world we now inhabit. How has Christianity shaped the histories of marriage and family? How did Christianity invent race and give birth to capitalism? And grappling with the ambivalent inheritance of Christianity, a tradition passed down by enslaved people and enslavers, by violent husbands, resourceful wives, and courageous sex workers, by rich people and the dispossessed, the book suggests Christians should give up on trying to redeem the world, a social order founded on violence and exploitation, and seek instead to end it. And that's radical, but I think there's a point. Something about the kinds of Christianities we have need to die. What is it? Malcolm Ferdinand speaks from a Haitian Caribbean perspective and reminds us that environmental collapse does not impact everyone equally and does not negate the varied social and political collapses already underway. There's a double fracture in our world among human beings, but also with the environment. I'll wrap up shortly. But the fact is, these thinkers are trying to help us to think about who we really are and what we really have. It ain't pretty. For me, decolonization is meant to be an inner process of awareness of the complex legacies of colonization and shaping the present world in which we live. It's a world marked by violence, and religions generally, and the church particularly, no matter their historical roots bear much responsibility. And to be clear, the church, no matter the denomination, has done great good in the world. I'm not negating that. But we need to look again at the violence, because it's there. And for me, this process is deep, because we need to face the unconscious, subconscious, hidden traumas and toxic ways of thinking that legitimizes violence in our world. Ultimately, I think a decolonial stance is necessary for Christian thinking itself. It helps to open up new and emerging worlds where we are not centered on human power, ego, and violence, and that we actively seek to face ourselves first with all our complicities. Is it perfect? No. Is it ideologically neutral? No. But is it helpful? Yes. And perhaps it's the only thing helping us to see ourselves clearly so that our hearts of stone might be broken, replaced by empathetic hearts of love alone. Thank you. Listen, if you were in Egypt at this World Council, it was popping off. And the person who spoke before me was Orthodox. He's Kenyan. And he got up as a black Kenyan man and spoke about the Russian Orthodox complicity in the war in Ukraine. And I looked at him and I thought I had courage. Jesus Christ. I hope you make it out the door. But I think they're having this conversation. It's just that it's not a world I know. But I knew instinctively in talking to the bishop, as I mentioned before, but on the ground, I am sure you still need to deal with power and power over others, even within that particular Christian demographic. The Protestant West and its colonial legacies across the world isn't the only one that is politically violent. We all are. So what's going on with Christianity? But we need to face these. We ain't really that pretty, you know. So I learned that they have that conversation going on, as we all must. So thank you. I do not thank you for asking this question, but it is an important one. It's interesting because I think when you read people like Frantz Fanon, or when you read people who talk about the kinds of relationship very complex between oppressed and oppressor, you realize precisely the context kind of circumscribes both in a toxic dance. So the imagination in which we live makes us both victims. And there are, you remember 12 Years a Slave? You remember this movie? And the slave master, he was painted as deranged, like crazy, obsessive. Like there's something crazy about the oppressor. And when I say crazy, I mean just not right. And I think there's something really psychopathological, let me use a better term, about coloniality. Here's the problem, though. We can both be inherited victims of these kinds of things. But in our world, if you're from a particular socioeconomic class, or you're white, or you're Western, whatever, you could be a victim, but you might get to live longer. And you might have better housing. And your children have access to better jobs. So the victimization is a bit more complex than that. You get to live, I get to die. So the whole system needs dismantling. And you're right. The people who are white and benefit from systems of privilege, you're like, where do you even begin to disentangle your relationship with the past? Here's my other problem with that. In schools in this country, do we even teach history in a way that helps people to disentangle from the past? No. Sorry, brother, I'm messing up your situation. So on one hand, yes. On the other hand, in an everyday, quotidian, practical way, the levels of inequality makes it a very complicated question. Yeah? Thank you. I think we have to actively work towards it. I think if we're honest with the biblical text, if we really want what God wants for the world, I mean, we would emphasize things like, in the end, the wolf shall lie down with the lamb. The something with the asp, or whatever the Bible says, and a little child shall lead them, and nothing shall hurt or cause pain on all my holy mountain. Is this beatific vision of peace? And predator and prey coexist, And those distinctions don't matter anymore because we are all in the reign of peace. And I would go through this kind of barometer of violence. How does it look? Let's scale back the violence. So why are we having a war in Iran? Why is the president of Venezuela so random? But it's not. Why does this happen? Do we need policies that do that? Have we not learned? It seems like we haven't. But the barometer, again, is an unviolent world to the best of our ability. And where violence erupts, accountable measures are put in place. So I would insist on that barometer, that measuring stick. And everything else, maybe if we are less violence-driven, we can be preventative. We can be creative. We can stop insisting on things like petroleum and start thinking about renewable energy. But of course, some people just don't want that to happen. Why? Because we're locked into a capitalistic mindset that uses everything at its disposal for the benefit of a very few at the expense of the majority. Now that's the kind of imagination I would like. And that's the way to test it out, I think. And I think that's what God desires. Sorry, I hope that helps. So David, I think seriously speaking, it's about reimagining life, and it starts with our children. It starts with our curriculum, and we have to be brave enough to kind of help foster new ways of thinking against the grain across the board. And all I can say is that's why I'm in a theological college training ministers, because I care that the priests that serve us are independent thinkers with a heart, that are not functionaries of toxic institutions. That's what I desire. And I try and teach. I wish we all leave space for this. I really don't want to answer your question, but I think it's something that we need to talk about. Something has to die in order that something lives. It's the way of life. And I think that process is taking place. Now, the question is, what are we fighting for? Like, are we in the same boat? We in the same boat, but we doing different things. And all I could say is, let's see what times bring. As for me, I stand where I stand and say the things I say, with all the strength the Lord gives me to do it. I'm just one voice. Maybe one little seed makes a difference. But I'm like you, waiting to see. And sometimes I want to say, Burn. Sometimes the little old lady in that little village who don't care but just to give her little so that her little church survives melts my heart. You know what I mean? And you find so much grace still. So I don't know, that's a complicated one for me.